What's going on, y'all? KMBest here. Let's take a look at the best decks to climb in Marvel Snap. We're going to start with the ramp list, which has in so many ways been the thing that makes this metagame different from the previous ones. The straw that stirs the drink as to why this metagame is the way it is that this list is so good and so powerful and so consistent. Thanks to the addition of Chamber, this is the list that is the you must be this tall to ride of the entire metagame. It sets the bar fairly high. And speaking of setting the bar high, remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy this video. I'm doing those plugs at the beginning now. We're gonna really take a chance at being a real YouTuber. This list is purely built for output. There are really only a couple of flex slots here. The 5s are flex slots, and of course, Valentina versus Jennifer Kale for your games where you stumble. But realistically, what this deck is going to be doing is outputting a pretty massive amount of points, some of which is going to be telegraphed. There's going to be one lane you're going to want to probably stay away from because it'll get to like 38 points with a Chamber and a couple of other big guys in it. There's going to be some interactivity coming out of the 5-drop slot. Various things you'll see will include Legion, Enchantress, Cosmic Ghost Rider. Just generally, you can mess around with those kind of things, but you don't want to have a little less interactivity unless you're going up on power. It really speaks to the way in which 5-drops exist, that basically all of the 5s that this deck would reasonably play are just 5s that do something cool rather than anything that has like a lot of stats. Real contrast between the 5s and the 6s and their roles in this deck. 5s are all utility, 6s are all stats. Interesting dichotomy there. This is a deck that sets the baseline for the metagame. If you aren't bigger than this in a realistic way, you are being relegated to tier 2 or below. In other words, this is the deck that defines what is and is not viable in Marvel Snap. When you're looking for an edge in ramp mirrors, the easiest place to find that edge is in deck building. Building for having another big 6-drop, meaning that you'll be able to threaten different lanes, is really what this Eson build is trying to do. It wants an additional big guy, so when both of you are doing the same thing, you should come out ahead in those heads-ups. Eson effectively represents a pretty massive amount of power here, thanks to Iron Patriot and Valentina, giving it free pulls. Longtime viewers will remember that the original version of the ramp deck was an Eson ramp deck before Chamber came out, doing many of the same things, and it's nice to see this deck exploring its roots. I've tried a bit of the Nightmare version as well. I think that's another direction you can go if you're looking for an edge, but it is a bit double-edged because it is still a 3-1 that you're playing, and it can be a little bit difficult to make sure that everything is actually going the way you want. Victoria Hand remains the creme de la creme of these kind of normal mid-range decks. It's very good. It can be an extremely good synergy-based mid-range deck. It can be a thing that's probably a little bit too small to stop, but generally speaking, this is still the bar for interactive mid-range. It's a worse bar than it was, but I still think it's generally at the top of interactive mid-range and what you need to be expecting things to do. This is the other sort of pillar of this metagame that if you want to try to be beating the meta, so to speak, you want to be trying to have something that has a good matchup into ramp and a good matchup into V-hand, and then maybe a little bit of extra points to spare because a lot of other people are going to try to exist in that space using discard stuff with Weapon H or playing Destroy generally. But this is a deck that balances offense and defense extremely well, and that's always been the best case for V-hand, is that offense and defense are hard for other decks to do a lot of the time. This is effectively the Sera tech of the metagame, more on that later, but this is a deck that has a very solid points output, a very reasonable interaction suite, and kind of defines what interactive mid-range looks like in this metagame. A lot of other interactive mid-range decks look like this. As an example, the Annihilus mid-range list has been evolving in recent weeks at high infinite, usually in the hands of Sizer. This is a deck that has a good amount of points in it and really is trying to exist in that similar space to V-Hand, where we have our synergy package that is the sort of backbone of the points part of the deck, and that synergy package is Annihilus and Sentry, or Cannonball and Mercury. This is sort of a old school style deck that is then packing a couple of specific tech cards. Gorgon, of course, for the V-Hand matchup. Very, very powerful there. We also have Shadow King, because Shadow King, despite the fact that everyone knows he's the tech card that defines this metagame, despite the fact that ramp is around and you have no good targets for that card in that deck, is still the best tech card in this metagame because there is just so much random stuff that he will absolutely take care of. An absolute all-star of the metagame, one of the more defining cards in it. Probably not the most defining card, but when you're talking about making a video like this that sort of sketches out the boundaries within which you have to color as a deck builder, this is one of the much more harshly defined boundaries. Shadow King Midrange is going to be around. I know it seems a little bit weird for me to say this is the same as V-Hand. It kind of is. Like, those decks are trying to occupy very similar spaces. At least this one is trying to occupy a bit of a different space. Juggernaut Cosmo Midrange with Spider or Superior Spider-Man in it is starting to become defined as an archetype in my mind right now. Like, it might not be the kind of thing that has trickled down to relatively lower ranks on the ladder, but this kind of thing, capital T, capital K, capital O, capital T again, has been kind of around in a sort of noticeable way at High Infinite, and I think it's really gotten pretty interesting in terms of how this deck actually fits into the metagame. It's a very high skill cap deck that has a lot of interactive pieces. You don't necessarily always want to be doing Juggernaut Cosmos stuff. Some of the other rest of the time, you'd be much more interested in getting stats on the board, things of that nature. But this is definitely a reasonable list to try to build around. And I think that this has been one of the more enduring legacies of this style of midrange. We played this style of midrange 3 to 6 months ago, and it's still here doing the same thing. A bit of a different twist on midrange. The interactive cards are different. The points in tech is a pretty generic descriptor that describes a lot of decks. This is more of a cousin of the Shadow King decks than it is a direct relative. A version that I've spent a lot of time with this week is the Gamer Ongoing list, which is a very similarly constructed list, but with more focus put on the synergistic point package and less focus put on the everything else going on here. But really, these are very similar lists, this and the Iris list. It's just instead of the Batroc Sam Wilson kind of industrial complex, we instead have the Sam Wilson Captain America industrial complex, the Moonstone industrial complex. This is a strong deck. This is a deck that I think, with the loss of a lot of Cosmic Ghost Rider in the metagame, and I know that sounds weird because we started with a Cosmic Ghost Rider deck, but A, not every ramp deck plays Cosmic Ghost Rider, and B, it's still a step down from a few weeks ago when every single deck played Cosmic Ghost Rider, it felt like. This is a deck that is now much more able to just do something pretty stupid, realistically speaking. And the point output in this deck makes it feel like a half combo, half interactive deck, which is just a really fun and enjoyable way to play Marvel Snap. This is the deck I've spent the most time with on this entire list over the last week. I have played a ton of this. It is genuinely a blast. I think it's a sick, sick, sick deck that does really, really cool and interesting things and occupies a potentially very powerful space into the metagame where people think they're going to be able to combo you. They're like, oh, it's a mid-range deck. You combo them back. You have a lane that's got like 80 power or something in that. That's the kind of thing you can do. Or people identify you as a combo deck. They think you won't interact with them. You have Juggernaut Cosmo. That's a thing you do. A lot of beef here. There's just like some really interesting dynamics going on with this deck. Speaking of a lot of beef, Discard has picked up Weapon H and has become a deck that you're just going to see a decent amount of. And I don't necessarily know if that's up to Discard per se. I think it's more down to this deck actually matches up pretty well into ramp unless you're getting specific tech carded. And like, I've had games where, like, you know, my Morbius gets Enchantress, something else gets Cosmic Ghost Rider, but since they're the ramp deck and they're spending their turn 4 on Enchantress and turn 5 on Cosmic Ghost Rider, I can still end up having more power than them. That's a really interesting dynamic that this deck has. Now, I admit, I think my build is a little bit weird. I think most other people are probably playing, Modok instead of Lady Sif. I understand that. This is just the one that I've had the most success with. I've enjoyed it the most. Every time I make the swap, I'm like, yeah, I don't know. It's not all that good. I think this deck is a pretty solid points output deck, and the metagame has a relatively lower point ceiling, in large part because of the rise of these sort of like weird and nihilist mid-range decks and the general amount of ramp you're going to see, and the fact that people are playing Destroy, which has a high point ceiling but doesn't access it all the time. This deck just kind of does numbers pretty well, and at baseline, that's just a really good thing to be. When I think about this deck in my head, it's like less consistent ramp, but with more numbers in it. And no interaction. And if you are willing to make that trade-off, this is a very reasonable choice. A couple of really maximal combo decks, because I think that's a reasonable place to approach this metagame. Like, obviously, if people are playing ramp, one really good way to beat them is just be like, none of your cards matter against me. Now, this is also a deck that is built to try to beat V-Hand in this and other Shadow King decks, or it's a deck that exists sort of. When you look at this deck, what you should see is the sort of restrictions that are placed on it via the metagame. A, it's got to be bigger than ramp, and B, it's got to have a plan so that it doesn't get like double Shadow Kinged. And that's the kind of thing that this deck is built to do. That's what the Fallen One stuff is doing here. It's saying like, look, I'm just going to combo this off. You are not going to be able to interact with this because it's all going to be face down on the final turn of the game. And that's actually one of the spaces where like Juggernaut Cosmo midrange can end up a little bit stronger into this stuff than Shadow King midrange, which is an interesting dynamic because this is built to beat Shadow King midrange, or at least to have a game plan into Shadow King midrange where it would otherwise just completely fall apart. This is, of course, the Derek Man-Spider list. I would consider this the sort of maximal dummy point output deck, but unfortunately, it's actually quite difficult to play because of all of these dynamics. It's a list that rewards you for metagame knowledge and being able to guess what kind of interaction your opponent is going to be able to play and what your plan should look like in the face of that kind of interaction. It's very face up, except for when it's entirely face down on the final turn of the game, and the numbers here are big as hell. The superior PF list is approaching a metagame that has a decent amount of Shadow King in it by saying, I just actually don't care. You can't Shadow King all 3 lanes. These numbers are going to be way too big for anyone to beat without that card. This is a deck that I have played and gotten to literally 50 points in every location. There are so many ways to do so many stupid things with this deck. It is also, however, quite difficult. It's really hard to play this deck. A lot of your instincts are going to be wrong. A lot of your instincts are going to be related to how do I do a smaller thing rather than comboing off maximally. This is a powerful, powerful list. I do think it's probably worth checking out the video I did on it if you want to get a sense of what some of the play patterns should be. Very strong, very high level, and genuinely, it might not be worth investing in if you're not really going to spend the time with it, because this is a pretty expensive list. It's a list that is, I think, 11 non-Series 3 cards. The only one that is Series 3 is like Venom. So if you're going to go out of your way to play this, you need to actually genuinely master it. It's nice for me to see that zombies are able to stick around in the metagame in some way. It's not their fault they're not really around anymore. Like, it's just Shadow King. That's really it. I think the zombie package is, if anything, a little bit underrated relative to its play rate. And it's nice to see something really like doubling and tripling and quadrupling down on activating those zombie giant man procs. I got this negative list from Smiles, aka Smiz, aka Smokes. Now, that's who he is. This is a deck that is a little bit awkwardly positioned, but it is still going to be able to do dummy points, and that's really all you care about here. Normally, I would be a little bit averse to like the Killmonger Shang-Chi stuff in here. I'm not the world's most opposed to it in this context because you're going to run into basically other people playing Destroy. And people playing, if they're playing like an actual null deck, this is just a really good thing to be doing. Like just a very powerful thing for you to have access to. And I think that's largely what this deck is leaning on right now. It's weird because I think normal negative would be pretty good, but it just gets to pick up some free value thanks to people trying like, various things with Wade Wilson that I've seen that I don't really expect to stick around, but we'll get to those later in the video. I think that there's just like a little bit of free value attached to this deck, and the rest of it is just, it's a Mr. Negative deck. Don't tell anyone, but I'm pretty sure Hela's like a good deck right now. I think this is just like a flat out correct decision to play a lot of the time. Like, maybe you don't have a heart to gamble, but you're gonna beat a lot of these dorky mid-range decks by doing this stuff. Like, you just put them in a trash can, you give them a noogie, you give them a swirly, whatever it is that bullies do in 80s movies, that's what you do to a lot of these smaller ball mid-range decks. You basically always have a puncher's chance thanks to various gambit combinations. You have the access to a bunch of output and a shocking amount of agency when you play a list like this. I don't think people think of Hela as a high agency deck, and I think they are wrong not to think of it like that. There are some things, right? Like, your draws are not that much better than like a ramp deck. They're not that much better than like the discard deck. There's stuff that can go wrong there where, like, if you're playing those pseudo mirrors, just like as points decks, you can end up with less points. Like, it's definitely possible, but I think on average you're probably about as big or bigger than some of those decks, depending on how things actually play out. I think this list is extremely well positioned because it is wholly uninteractive, but it is a little bit smaller than a typical really good Hela meta is. So I do think that it doesn't have the sort of end boss capabilities that it has in really good metas that are like wholly devoted to mid-rangey decks that it just beats the crap out of, but it is just a good deck. Another deck that is just a good deck is Destroy. Like, realistically, I don't think it's the greatest deck in the world, but I do think it is very clearly like above the bar for playability. It just does what it does in a powerful way. There are stats accesses in this deck that are extremely strong. You can do very powerful things with the list. It has a lot of play into a lot of different matchups. The game is different depending on your hand. One of the coolest things about Destroy is I think it feels great to play and it feels interesting to play against. It's a deck that is almost never guaranteed a win unless the positioning is basically exactly correct. All games are dynamic. They go to turn 6. There's vulnerabilities to various tech cards. Like I said, I have long maintained that I think Destroy is the best deck to be the best deck in the game. It's not that right now, but I am quite happy that it's playable. On the other hand, I am a little sad that I haven't been able to find a place where Weapon X really succeeds on his own terms. And I definitely haven't been able to find a place where Wade Wilson succeeds on his own terms in this list. Talk about a couple of honorable mentions. One of the things I've been doing this week is tooling around with Sera control type stuff, or just anything that is looking to do this kind of thing. I realize it's probably like destined to be tier 2.5 forever for various point ceiling reasons, but it has been at least nominally pretty enjoyable, pretty fun, pretty nice, pretty cool. I don't think this is a bad deck. I do think that, like, I hate running into the thing that happens where, like, you play a Merlin on 2 and then the rest of your plays are, like, another card every turn. And then your hand is full of Merlin crap. And then you don't actually have a lot of access to your entire deck because you've blown at least a draw. It's weird. Like, I like Merlin in here, and I know he's not that bad, but it's just one of those things where it's like, man, I wish you were better. I wish this wasn't happening. I wish I had a little more control over this. Like, I shouldn't feel bad about playing the best card on my deck on turn 2, and I do a decent amount of the time here. I think this is a reasonably powerful list that does reasonably powerful things, and there's nothing bad I can say about it other than there's really not a lot of points here. I saw this list, and I don't know that Chamo made this list, but I've got a pretty good guess that Chamo made this list. This is a very Chamo list. I would imagine it's either him or Andre Var. If I had to just guess at who put this list together, I think there's a good reason why Wiccan has fallen out of favor, and it's largely related to the reason that Sera has fallen out of favor. It's that these are not as good at doing points as the more synergistic mid-rangey decks. Like when you think about synergistic mid-rangey decks, interactive with either, Shadow King, Juggernaut Cosmo, that kind of stuff. You have the Batroc version of them, which I've represented on this tier list with the Iris deck. You have the V-Hand version of them, which of course I've represented with V-Hand, and of course the ongoing version of them, which I have already talked about as well. That leaves just not a lot of room for a Wiccan deck that is not scaling with itself. And so the attempt here is being made to address that by being a V-Hand deck in the context of a Wiccan deck. I think largely what's happening is this is people going out of their way to play pet cards rather than optimizing for like the best thing they could be doing. But I do think that if you are one of those people, I do like the build. It does cool stuff. I just think that when you strip away my attachment to playing Wiccan-y midrange, if I wanted to play a V-Hand Shadow King deck, probably just play V-Hand. Last up, the honorary Destroy spot on this list is being taken up by Destroy. All right, this is like the kind of thing I've been seeing people do with Wade Wilson. There's just a lot of like this kind of Dormammu-y thing. I've been seeing it. I've been not very impressed with it. Every one of them kind of looks like a deck that has exactly Killmonger. This one has a Shang-Chi in it because it's also a Thanos deck in terms of interaction. And then if you're not doing that, it's just super over. Like the dream here is you want to be like Dormammu final turn with a Shang-Chi. Oh, look at all my points. Or Dormammu with a death. Oh, look at all my points. Like there's stuff here. Like it's not nothing, but ultimately it kind of feels like a pretty capped point output list without a lot of interaction to make that cap feel reasonable. I'm not overly concerned with this Dormammu stuff. Like a lot of the time it feels like he's a little underpowered. I've banged this drum a lot, but this guy could use a couple more points of power because like he'll come out and he'll be like, oh, it's a 216, but the cards I destroyed had 7 power. So really I'm only gaining 9 power in this lane. And it's like, yeah, all right. Like, yeah, do your thing, Dormammu. Just hasn't been able to sustain the amount of interaction that you would want from a deck like that. And if it's just doing points, it gets point gapped by quite a few things in this metagame. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal. Remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.